The good moments come back just enough to keep you hoping. Maybe they apologize every once in a while. Maybe there's affection, emotional closeness, eye contact. Maybe they disappear for a little while and send you a text that says, I miss you. The intensity of the makeup after a really low low. Or maybe you get glimpses of that person you met in the beginning. And those moments feel so relieving that you start chasing them. Maybe one day you feel deeply emotionally connected and the next day deeply emotionally abandoned. And so over time, your nervous system becomes attached to the relief, the reunion, the emotional high after the pain. And we become addicted to the person, to the hope, the fantasy, the longing, the relief, and the pursuit of finally being chosen.
Welcome to Grow with Robin Breckenridge, a podcast about stepping into the most fully expressed, aligned, and conscious version of yourself. Here, we dive into the real work of personal growth, establishing boundaries, understanding your patterns, building self-trust, healing emotional wounds, and creating relationships that feel safe, authentic, and fulfilling. I'm Robin, a life and relationship coach, and in each episode, we'll explore the tools, insights, and conversations that will help you not just improve your life and relationships, but truly transform them. You don't have to just go through it. Let's grow through it, and let's do it together.
You will be punished when you express your needs. There will be double standards in the relationship, which means that the rules do not apply to you, or the same rules don't apply to you that applies to them. And there is something that Elise mentioned in the last episode too, something called crazy making behavior that happens in narcissistic dynamics. And if you are in a relationship where there is consistent double standards, you will feel crazy. And if you know, you know. There is always emotional control. There's always a lack of empathy. I shouldn't say like that this person never exhibits empathy, but I would say, again, consistently when you are expressing things or if conflict comes up, it's going to be a consistent pattern that they are not able to access empathy. They will need admiration and validation constantly. They will protect their ego at all costs over your well-being, over the relationship. And there will be a power dynamic in this relationship where they are in the one-up position and you are in the one-down position. Now, it is really important that if you are in relationship with a narcissist or someone who has similar behavior, it is important that you seek out the right aligned forms of help, because sometimes feedback from our loved ones or people who haven't experienced these type of dynamics can feel shaming, can make you feel more isolated, can make you blame yourself. But I want to first acknowledge that it is also extremely hard for people that love someone who's in these dynamics. Like if you have a child or a sibling or a friend, it can be really hard. It can be really frustrating. And it can be really hard to not say like, what in the heck are you doing to yourself? And why don't you just leave? Which, you know, is logical advice, but what's keeping someone in that relationship is not logical. Feelings aren't logical. Trauma isn't logical. Those are the things that are keeping that person in. Nobody wants to be in relationship with someone from a logical perspective that treats them like shit. But because of the wounding and because of the complexity of this, it's just not that simple. So for people who are listening and or watching that love someone who is inside one of these relationship dynamics, it's really hard too. And watching someone you care about slowly disappear inside of a relationship, or watching them become obsessive or anxious or isolated is really hard. And it creates a lot of helplessness for the people who are trying to support or love the person that's in that relationship. And sometimes because of the frustration of these type of relationships, the person that's in it can feel like deeply misunderstood. Again, we can almost drive people more towards the partner. There's a very interesting dynamic in these relationships where often scapegoating someone is one way that they stay connected. So like if you are the mom of a daughter who's in this dynamic and the narcissist doesn't like you, for instance, they might actually connect together through the dislike of you or the dislike of your dislike for the relationship. So it's really hard for people that are in it. It's hard for people who are watching people they love in it. And there have never been as many resources for all people involved as there is now. So I would highly encourage you, if you are in a situation like that, to go get professional help, or at the very least research information, whether that's online or in books. But information like just leave is rarely ever helpful, because this person that's in the relationship is stuck and they're experiencing fear and hope and fantasy and longing. And sometimes there are children involved in this, and that brings a whole lot of complexity. Sometimes there's financial dependence, and sometimes people have truly made the relationship or this person their full-time job. And there are so many years invested in trying to keep this relationship that even that is a factor that creates a lot of complexity when leaving. So it's just a reminder that if someone you know is in this dynamic, shame does not help people leave. So shaming someone, like, what's wrong with you? Why would you be with somebody like this? Maybe you're the problem, is never going to be helpful. Judgment is not helpful when helping people heal. Screaming facts at someone whose nervous system is deeply attached does not create clarity. Safe support does. You may have your own boundaries with this person in this relationship. Extending compassion is also one way to support someone, directing them to more aligned support, like a professional. And also just knowing that you hold that safe space for when that person wakes up, because we can't force anybody to wake up, and they will only wake up the moment that they are ready to wake up. So just kind of holding that safe space. So when they do wake up, you are someone they can go to. So let's go to the start of these relationships. A lot of narcissistic relationships do not start badly. That's why people stay. Nobody is going to stay with someone that treats them like shit from the very beginning. I mean, I'm sure there are some, but a majority of people are not going to do that. What happens is that it feels really good in the beginning of these relationships. And these relationships start with a lot of intensity of connection, attention. You feel pursued. You feel deeply chosen, seen, wanted, special. And sometimes it feels like, oh my God, finally, like I've found the one, or I've finally found this person that I've been dreaming of my whole life. Finally, someone sees me, chooses me, wants me in the way that I've always wanted to be wanted. And for those of us that have spent a lot of our lives feeling emotionally deprived, neglected, unseen, abandoned, or like we've had to fight for love, man, that kind of intensity feels intoxicating. And it's essentially like if you've been starving, you haven't eaten food in a long time, and somebody comes to you and offers you a Twinkie, no nutritional value. We know those things don't, like, they can sit on a shelf for 20 some years or something like that. Don't quote me on that, but they're not good for you. They don't have nutritional value. But if you haven't eaten in a long time, that Twinkie is going to feel like the best meal you've ever had. So love bombing, for instance, which is coming in hot with a lot of intensity, When you're starving, love bombing feels like the meal you always dreamed of. It absolutely does not feel like a red flag, and it absolutely is a red flag. Anybody going that fast and intensely, that's just not sustainable. It's not sustainable for anybody. And because there are cycles in narcissistic abuse, the beginning of a relationship cycle with a narcissist starts with idealization. So they are focusing all on you. You are the best thing that ever happened. They're love bombing you. There is really fast attachment going on. There is what feels like a lot of intimacy, but what's happening is probably a lot of over disclosure, because intimacy happens when we're safe enough to allow our vulnerability to come out. So if I bring back the boundary pyramid, intimacy happens in the trust category. We don't know people enough, right? What is trust? Trust is data over time. If we don't have enough data on someone, we don't know if that level of vulnerability is safe. So it starts with idealization, and then we go into devaluation, discard, and then something called hoovering. That is the cycle of narcissistic relationships. So you are great, you're high, all of a sudden they dethrone you, they discard you in some way, whether it is breaking up with you, cheating on you, or stonewalling you, becoming disapproving. And then there's something called a hoover, which a lot of people haven't heard of. This is a term that they use in narcissistic abuse recovery, but a hoover is named after the vacuum cleaner. And a hoover is when the narcissist will come back around into your life and try to hook you back into the dynamic. What is very common is maybe you get a text on your birthday or a holiday after you haven't heard from this person in a long time. I've had people I've worked with that have gotten a hoover from their narcissist 10 years later. So be careful, guys, because they come back around. So a hoover means that they are, again, like sending out a hook to hook you back into the dynamic. So it might be like, I had a heart attack and I'm in the hospital. And of course, you're a person with a heart and empathy, and you go, oh my gosh, are you okay? And then they never respond again. And that's their way of flipping the power dynamic back. Or maybe they re-engage with you. Or maybe they send you a text apologizing and saying everything that you ever wanted to hear. And you lean back into the relationship, and then the power dynamic flips again. So let's talk about when that shift happens. That warmth or the pedestal that you're sitting on starts to become inconsistent, turns into coldness. The closeness becomes unpredictable. And now they're withdrawing, they're stonewalling, they're ghosting. There's confusion, mixed signals, emotional withholding, gaslighting, blame shifting, triangulation, punishment, double standards. You walk into conversations with them fully loaded with everything they've done to you, and somehow you leave apologizing to them. You leave interactions with these people feeling emotionally scrambled instead of emotionally safe. And over time, you start to question yourself. You start to question your reality. Am I overreacting? Am I too sensitive? Maybe I am the problem. And honestly, I think confusion becomes a part of the addiction in this, because now your nervous system is trying to get back to the version of the relationship that you had in the beginning, where it felt clearer, where you weren't the bad guy, where they really loved you. But that wasn't love. That was idealizing you. But man, it felt so good. You felt chosen, wanted, special. You felt a connection that felt like the things you read about in books or see in movies. And maybe even you start to realize that there's really unhealthy dynamics in the relationship. Maybe you listen to this podcast. Maybe you read a book and you go, okay, I'm going to have boundaries with this person and I'm going to take care of my inner child. But here's the problem. There are some unsaid rules in relationships with narcissists. And one of them is you do not hold them accountable, or God forbid, you do not leave them. because you will be punished for those things. And that punishment is a range of things. It could be that, again, they ghost you or stonewall you. Maybe it allows them to feel entitled enough to abuse you verbally or physically. And this is what Dr. Terry Real refers to as offending from the victim position. So offending from the victim position means that in their experience, your boundary, your attempt to hold them accountable, your attempt to protect yourself and keep yourself safe or be honest or have autonomy is an offense against them. And because they feel entitled to protect their ego at all costs, they are entitled to punish you with stonewalling, rage, silent treatment, withdrawing, emotional abuse, leaving you, defamation, manipulation, guilting you, blaming you, smear campaigns, withholding emotionally, being cruel. And that is why so many people are terrified to express needs or boundaries inside of a relationship. Now, I had someone one time contact me, and she really liked the work that I was doing. And she said, I think you need to dudify this curriculum. And I was like, okay, well, what do you mean by dudify this curriculum? And she said, well, my partner would never get this. This is like way over his head. And I don't think any men would understand this. Is there a way that you could make this more like digestible for men? And of course, that person is entitled to their own opinion, and that's totally okay. And in my experience, I have had the unique experience of my practice being half men since I started doing this work, which is unique. A lot of times, sometimes women kind of are more likely to come into this work. And then maybe as a result, they're bringing their partners in. And that's kind of how the men come in sometimes. And again, that's a little bit general. But in this work, I've had so many men come to me on their own to learn and grow. And this curriculum has been as beneficial and impactful to them as the women that has come through my door. And I've never had to adjust it based on gender. Now, I adjust it to individualize it to everybody that comes in, but I've never had to, quote unquote, dudify the curriculum. So the point of this story is that what I did was I dug a little deeper with this person and said, have you tried to have boundaries with your partner before? Give me a little backstory. And basically what I noticed was that there was a high likelihood her partner had some of the characteristics that we're talking about, and that it was still an attempt to try to adjust the approach so that it would land with that person, when potentially what might have been a better approach was for this person to have boundaries, internal boundaries for themselves. Maybe this relationship wasn't something that could be fixed because this person wasn't able to take accountability or allow for boundaries within the relationship. So I just thought it was interesting because sometimes we're still fighting to try to change the person or the relationship dynamic instead of looking at the reality of what is there. So in relationship with narcissists, we want to make sure that we're fighting the right fight. The right fight is in getting away. The right fight is in protecting you, is in no longer operating in life outside of your own standards of what you deserve in this life, which there is not one person on this planet, and I do not care what you've done, that deserves to be abused and deserves to be minimized and put down in their life consistently. There's not one person that deserves that. The wrong fight is trying to shape shift yourself to try to change that person or the relationship, to try to find the exact right formula that this person will understand and learn. We are powerless over other people's behavior, actions, and choices. And why it is notoriously said that narcissists do not get better even with therapy is because if you can't take accountability If you can't look at yourself, you can't change. That's why, because of that wall that goes up from that prohibits them from looking at themselves or learning from shameful experiences or times that they've acted outside of their integrity. Because they can't look at it, they can't change it. So we want to make sure that we're fighting the right fight. The right fight is always to protect ourselves, to keep ourselves emotionally safe. There is a term that goes along with narcissistic relationship dynamics, and it's called intermittent reinforcement. And essentially that means that these relationships mimic the emotional experience of slot machines. And studies show that intermittent reinforcement is highly addictive and creates very powerful trauma bonds that can be extremely difficult to break. The good moments in the relationship, because these relationships are not all bad, the good moments come back just enough to keep you hoping. Maybe they apologize every once in a while. Maybe there's affection, emotional closeness, eye contact. Maybe they disappear for a little while and send you a text that says, I miss you. The intensity of the makeup after a really low low. Or maybe you get glimpses of that person you met in the beginning, and those moments feel so relieving that you start chasing them. Maybe one day you feel deeply emotionally connected, and the next day deeply emotionally abandoned. And so over time, your nervous system becomes attached to the relief, the reunion, the emotional high after the pain. And we become addicted to the person, to the hope, the fantasy, the longing, the relief, and the pursuit of finally being chosen. Now, I'm so excited. In 2 weeks, I'm having my colleague and dear friend, Erin Watt, back on the podcast. Erin is in the process of writing a book on love addiction. So I'm really excited to have Erin come on and talk a little bit more about the addictive part of these relationships. But one other thing that complicates these things is that many people who are in these type of relationships grew up in environments where love and intensity were very much intertwined. Unpredictability felt normal. Emotional inconsistency felt familiar. So calm love may feel very unfamiliar. Healthy relationships might feel boring. Meanwhile, narcissistic or emotionally unavailable people can feel incredibly exciting and activating because they're stirring up the wounds that predate them, the longing, the pursuit of love and attention, fantasy, attachment wounding, abandonment wounds, nervous system activation. And it takes us right back to our childhood where love and alignment and connection was intertwined with anxiety, unavailability, longing, and emotional activation. So remember, some people feel like home to us, but we have to remember that some of us had homes that were dysfunctional. And that the people that feel like home may be a familiar level of dysfunction to a younger part of us. It is so common that when we are in these relationship dynamics, it becomes our whole world, our whole focus. And at some point in our healing, we also have to get honest about our patterns inside of that dynamic, not to shame ourselves, not to victim blame or blame ourselves for someone else's abuse, manipulation, or cruelty, but to understand what kept me emotionally hooked here. And I go back to an experience I had where I had a boss who was a narcissist. And I started to really wake up to the behavior. And I got in that place of like, she's doing this and she's doing this and she's doing this to me. And it was all about her and her behavior. And I thought, okay, what am I doing? Am I doing anything here? Of course, like me, not me. I'm not doing anything. And I went, oh, goodness. I keep going back. Now, that isn't to blame me, but if we're talking about accountability, I had a part in that. And that's a deeper pattern for me where I can stay in dynamics that don't serve me for way longer than I need to. But that was my part. My part was to look at, why do I stay? Why do I keep going back, expecting things to change? Or thinking that maybe this time it will be different. And what I found was that I was abandoning myself to keep that connection, whether it's romantic partnerships, a job, but understanding where you are abandoning yourself is where we can transmute this to wisdom. It's where we can make what's happening in that relationship purpose-driven for you. You can learn and grow. It's not just a mistake. It's a learning opportunity. And that's where we begin to move from powerlessness to empowerment. And it reminded me, today I had the 4 Agreements out, which is a book by the extremely wise Don Miguel Ruiz. I've read this book a bunch of times, but for some reason I pulled it out for a client and I flipped to a page right before I recorded this episode. And this is the page that I opened up to. In your whole life, nobody has ever abused you more than you have abused yourself. And the limit of your self-abuse is exactly the limit that you will tolerate from someone else. If someone abuses you a little more than you abuse yourself, you will probably walk away from that person. But if someone abuses you a little less than you abuse yourself, you will probably stay in the relationship and tolerate it endlessly. If you abuse yourself very badly, you can even tolerate someone who beats you up, humiliates you, and treats you like dirt. Why? Because in your belief system, you say, I deserve it. This person is doing me a favor by being with me. I'm not worthy of love and respect. I'm not good enough. We have the need to be accepted and to be loved by others, but we cannot accept and love ourselves. The more self-love we have, the less we will experience self-abuse. Self-abuse comes from self-rejection, and self-rejection comes from having an image of what it means to be perfect and never measuring up to that ideal. Our image of perfection is the reason we reject ourselves. It is why we don't accept ourselves the way we are and why we don't accept others the way they are. I thought that was pretty coincidental that I opened up to that page, but it was a reminder. And this is the part where it's hard to look at yourself in the mirror and why we don't want to stay focused on someone else's behavior indefinitely, because there's so much rich learning in our behavior. When I rewound back to an abusive relationship that I was in, I can now look back and know that I was more verbally abusive to myself than the person I was in relationship with. And it makes perfect sense to me that I allowed that in because of the critical inner voice I had going on. And to be fair, at that time of my life, I don't even think I knew I had that critical of an inner voice. I had actually never even slowed down to really listen to it, because eventually we stop focusing on the narcissist and the narcissist behavior, and we begin healing the part of us that tolerated, normalized, chased, excused, or stayed attached to the dynamic. Not from shame, from consciousness, compassion, and wanting something healthier for ourselves. I know we talk about self-abandonment a lot on this podcast, but you are not in a relationship with a narcissist and not self-abandoning. In fact, it is the prerequisite to being with somebody that's personality disordered. You have to leave yourself. It's the only way it works. So let's look at what self-abandonment can look like in a relationship with a narcissist. It looks like betraying your own limits, staying quiet to keep the peace, accepting behavior that hurts you, making excuses repeatedly, disconnecting from your own needs, abandoning your peace to try to preserve the attachment. And that's because at some point, our attachment system kicks in and we start to prioritize keeping the connection with this person or keeping their positive regard, their attention, their love over our well-being. I want to speak directly to anybody listening who is currently inside one of these dynamics. I believe you. I believe how confusing this feels. I believe how painful this is. I believe how emotionally consuming this is. And I know how hard these relationships can be to explain to other people. I also know how hard it is to get out of these type of dynamics. And I know how hard these relationships can be to explain to other people, especially because from the outside, people often only see the logic of the situation. But meanwhile, you're experiencing the emotional attachment, the hope, the depth, the trauma bond, the history, the nervous system attachment, the longing, the grief, and the confusion. And if you're inside one of these relationships right now, I want to say to you very clearly, this is not healthy love. There is no option of having peace and safety in this relationship. And you do not deserve to live in constant anxiety, confusion, hypervigilance, self-doubt, emotional chaos, and terror. You deserve a relationship where you feel emotionally safe, where you can exhale, where you can make mistakes and learn from them, where you are not constantly trying to earn consistency, honesty, accountability, or care. And I know leaving can feel incredibly hard and sometimes impossible, especially when your nervous system is deeply attached. But there is support out there. There are people who understand these dynamics. There are therapists, trauma-informed professionals and coaches, workshops, treatment programs, books, support groups, and communities specifically designed to help people untangle themselves from narcissistic abuse and trauma bonds. One of the books that I highly recommend to people that are starting to get curious about narcissistic dynamics is called The Wizard of Oz and Other Narcissists. I also highly recommend the work of Dr. Ramani. And for people who feel deeply stuck or like it is impossible to leave, because there is something that happens, and Aaron Watt and I will talk a little bit more about this in our episode. But with trauma bonds, with leaving narcissistic abuse relational dynamics, often people go into what's called a relational withdrawal. And there are lots of very highly regarded studies that show that the same part of your brain that is activated in meth or heroin withdrawal, which are some pretty strong withdrawals to go through from substances, are the same areas of your brain that are activated in what they call love withdrawal. We would not send someone who was withdrawing from meth to like their room to white knuckle it on their own. At this stage, we have enough information that there are detox centers. There are places to help these people navigate through a really, really tough experience. The same thing goes for this. If you are in withdrawal, if you've ever experienced withdrawal, I don't know if there's anything more intense from an emotional perspective. So the places that I recommend are treatment or workshop facilities. The Meadows is amazing. I believe there's one in Arizona, and I think they have some other locations. There is a workshop facility called Onsite, which is, I believe they do like 5-day intensives where you go and just kind of do some work on yourself. That's in Tennessee. And they help people heal trauma bonds, attachment wounds, addiction patterns in relationships, and relational trauma. Also, we have Elise, who is a resource if anybody is going through withdrawal. And of course, check out her future events that she's doing. Aaron Watt, who is another kind of family in this podcast, is putting out an amazing book on this subject, and she is an amazing place for information. So we have some resources just within this podcast as well. But I will tell you, probably the bravest thing you can do in these type of situations and dynamics is to stop trying to save the relationship and start saving yourself. That is the right fight. So before I go, because I know that when I was young and involved in a situation like this, I didn't really have a lot of information and I wasn't really sure what exactly was healthy in a relationship or if these things were normal. So let me just kind of touch on what is healthy in a relationship. It is healthy in a relationship for you to feel more like yourself inside of the relationship than less of yourself. You do not have to constantly try to decode someone. You are not terrified every time they pull away. They don't threaten to break up with you every time there is some disharmony in the relationship or conflict. You do not have to work so hard to earn consistency or their love. Healthy relationships allow for you to have peace, clarity, trust, emotional safety, consistency, stability, and honesty. Now, keep in mind, sometimes healthier love or relationships initially feel a little quieter. Some people might call that boring. And that is because your nervous system is no longer in survival mode. And we'll talk more about what attachment wounding looks like in relationships. For right now, those are some examples of what it looks like and feels like to be in a healthy relationship dynamic. So it is a hard reality when we realize that intensity and love are not the same thing. And it can bring up some grief when we've spent years mistaking longing for love, anxiety for alignment, and emotional highs for connection. But we can't have intensity and peace in the same container. Now, we'll talk in the future about ways we can bring healthy intensity into our life. I'm telling you, I am someone who loves intensity in my life, and I have brought it into my life in so many less self-destructive ways. For instance, I am in the process of volunteering in a foster care program to mentor adolescents. That's pretty intense, guys. However, it's not self-destructive. It's purpose-driven because I get to be impactful. That child, whoever that child will be, because I'm still in the process, gets some mentorship and healthy connection. And yet it's still like that version of me that was 15 years old and driving to the bar, to the coolest club and using my fake ID and going in there like I had no fear in the world. That girl still exists in me. She was just seeking out a lot of intensity in places that ended up hurting her. So we don't have to get rid of intensity completely, but you don't want it in your relationships. Not like that. We can have passion. That's okay. So let's fight the right fight. We don't have to fight to change them, to change the relationship. We don't have to chase anymore. We can start to create safety in our relationships and boundaries and safety in our nervous system and ultimately safety within our relationship to ourselves. So over the next couple episodes, I want to continue talking about this topic because I think that it's something that impacts a lot of people. And again, maybe you don't identify with having a narcissist in your life, but maybe there was something or some shade of what we talked about that's familiar to you. And I think that means that there's something to learn and grow from as well. And if you know someone who maybe doesn't listen to this podcast, but is in one of these relationships and you don't know what to do, if it feels aligned, maybe you can pass along this episode and who knows, maybe it will plant a seed. Maybe it will be the mirror this person needs to wake up. But I promise there is peace on the other side of these relationships, clarity, and a fully expressed version of you. So I'll see you next time. Have a great week.
That's it for today's episode. Thank you so much for being here and for doing this work. If this episode resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Come connect with me over on TikTok at Robin Breckenridge or Instagram at Coach with Robin, where I share even more insights, tools, and conversations around boundaries, self-trust, relational healing, and so much more. And just a quick reminder, this podcast is for educational and personal growth purposes only. The insights and tools I share are based on my experience as a life and relationship coach and are meant for general guidance. Each person's story is unique, and the nuances of individual experiences can't always be addressed in this format. What's shared here may not be applicable to every situation, especially those involving abuse, oppression, severe mental illness, or systematic harm. If you or someone you know is in crisis, please seek support from a qualified mental health professional or emergency resources. Thank you for listening and for showing up for yourself in this way. Take care, and I'll see you next time.